Welcome to the fifth episode of SchezzWho, folks. Love to have you on. Love to have you watching. Make sure to subscribe to this channel. Make sure to like this video. Make sure to comment because, of course, I want to grow this thing. Of course, I want to shout out my wife, Andrea, whose efforts created this channel and whose support is the only reason I can be great here at all. So, love you. Remember to use the great resource of Southern Volkswagen in Chesapeake. If you want a great used car, reach out to Charlie Roy to help get you one. And remember, that's in Chesapeake, and that's Southern Volkswagen. Shout out to Ellen's Homestyle and Barbecue Restaurants. There's a Portsmouth location near to me on Airline Boulevard and a Virginia Beach location on Indian River Road across from Regent University. Fantastic food. I usually do a small speech right about here or so before I get to my main topic. And on a situation like that, I would like to speak on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I want to do that subject justice by doing a whole show on that. So wait for that one a little ways down the line. I know it's a horrible, deadly situation with massacres, with disaster, but it's a deep topic, a near century-long conflict, and I can't do that so quickly and blindly reacting to it. So I don't want to do that and save it for deeper issues with a deeper show. So stay tuned for that and get ready for my guest. Tonight I'll be discussing a candidate's travels in Virginia toward the General Assembly, her thoughts, her trials with the Democratic Party of Virginia, and what makes her quite unique. My guest is Makya Little. She's the first-time candidate running to represent portions of Prince William and Fairfax counties of Virginia's House of Delegates. She is a mother, a former FBI and CIA officer, an equity advocate, and a 27-year resident of Woodbridge, Virginia. In 2019, Makya fought to reform how African-American history is taught in Virginia as the parent advocate of the Virginia's Commission on African-American History and Education. As a second-generation FBI employee, Ms. Little has worked with congressional leaders to draft legislation that enhances law enforcement accountability and transparency. Furthermore, as a survivor of domestic violence, she authored House Bill 1351, known as Makya's Law, and advocated for the removal of the one-year waiting period that victims of domestic violence must wait to be granted a full divorce in Virginia. Makya Little is running to help unify her community so it can solve problems that impact their shared prosperity together. And she's doing it as an independent, as a writing candidate. And we'll get to that by beginning right now and having her on the show. Miss Little, how are you as of this moment on October 12th?
I'm blessed. Thank you for asking. This has been probably the most dynamic professional development experience of my life, but I'm definitely feeling blessed to be able to run and represent my district.
That's excellent. I can't wait to dive deep into that. I've prepared my questions in advance. So let's go with the first one. As you know, we have a breakdown of we're going to discuss yourself, then we're going to go to your message, and then to the problem that you're dealing with and why you're running. So first off, what are the trials and tribulations of being raised in a transient military family?
It's a great question. First of all, it's almost impossible to call one place home, and I struggled with that growing up, where people would ask me where I was from, and I would essentially just say, from the DC area. But then they wanted to get into the nitty gritty. How long were you born there? And when they pressed for that, well, where were you born? I'm like, Arizona. Like, you can't, put that together. But to not have even seen that until I was an adult, it makes it hard to really have roots somewhere. So the closest thing I found is Woodbridge, because my family relocated to Prince William County in 1996. And although I attended college in Florida, I always claimed this is home. And so Woodbridge is now the place where not only I grew up, I'm raising my kids here, but to have started grade school overseas and feel the culture shift every time you move definitely does a wear on your friendship circle as well as your lived experiences.
Sorry for that little bit of delay there. Wasn't responding to my fingers. I can't empathize. I've been in the same area of Virginia all of my life. I haven't even moved states, haven't lived outside of the country. So this is a whole new world, literally world,
Yeah.
a view that you might have. If you don't mind, what do you take from observing your mom leave the military and then going to work in the FBI? What was that like?
It was fascinating because when we moved back from Berlin, Germany, it was really a life shift for all of us. Obviously, leaving friends behind, and before social media, all you had were pen pals. And then seeing her leave the military and consider being a stay-at-home mom and just not feeling fulfilled with that. And when she basically decided to start all over and applied for the FBI as a special agent. For those who know anything about the FBI's history, it's not the most inclusive place. And so to watch my mom fight to get admitted to the FBI Academy and be one of the only people of color on the stage, that was eye opening as a child.
And I also was able to learn a little bit about where you went to high school. And as you pointed out, I sort of butchered how the acronym was. So, I'll let you name it this way. What was that school like? Getting into it, the community around it, learning from there. What was
Yeah.
the culture? What was the diversity? And what does it exemplify with Virginia's school system, which is going to be important for you as a future legislator?
Okay, I'll try to attach this succinctly. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, Governor's School of Virginia, is definitely a very unique place and experience for a 14-year-old to encounter. As I stated, because I had witnessed some of the barriers my mother faced with getting admitted into the FBI Academy. And I didn't even know what racism was until I returned from Germany and experienced it myself as a child. I had been in environments where I was one of, two, one only. And I had lived in PG County, Maryland, where people knew how to pronounce my name. And it was definitely an inclusive learning environment where I was identified as gifted. And so I knew going into this situation, even though it was great and would be great to have access to advanced academics, it wasn't necessarily something I was willing to trade for an inclusive learning environment and the high school experience, right? The typical traditional, boys, girls, hormones, teen life, prom, and all of these things, sports. I knew that was going to be something that I was going to miss out on, especially because it was a 2-hour commute from Prince William County. So now you're sacrificing culture and just teen time for advanced academic, and although I can't say that I didn't benefit from it, it's an unfortunate decision that a 14-year-old would have to make if that is not an environment where they feel comfortable. And to be one of 15 Black students in my class of about 450 back in 1996. It was hard as you're trying to get to learn yourself, to balance. And it's not even the advanced academics that's the challenge. It's that social, emotional, fitting in and getting along and feeling treated as an equal by your professors who aren't questioning your excellence because you have a different skin color. Leading the admissions reform for TJ in 2020 was definitely hard for me from an emotional standpoint, because when I left TJ, I honestly wanted nothing to do with it. And I had to kind of check myself, if you will, and understand that if people like me didn't advocate for reform, then we would essentially be closing the door behind us. And so doing the research, pulling out all the nerd energy and collaborating with fellow alum who also, since graduating, realized that the culture that was created at TJ was not indicative of the real world. And they too decided to reach back and help hold the door open for those coming behind us. And so we pulled our collective skill sets together and did the research. We ran the analytics, and we found that the barrier to admissions at TJ, which is considered, one of the number one schools or the top schools in the nation, it wasn't racial at all. It was actually socioeconomic. And so once we were able to comb through the data, we started lobbying essentially. And that is one of the bigger misnomers that I feel with schools, governor schools like TJ, that it's race-based. It's really about economics and access to resources. And that's why we need to protect public schools.
Appreciate that, because I would like to think that a great educational experience could be expanded. That's something that we should really strive for. And beyond the high school level, going into college as well, I'll note that you're the second FAMU Rattler that I've had on my show, behind Coral Springs elected official Nancy Medayer. You have education from there, George Mason and Northwestern. So I want you to sort of contrast HBCUs with other institutions. Also, if you could speak on the Biden campaign promise to eliminate HBCU student loan debt, and how should the Virginia General Assembly help out HBCUs going forward?
Well, first, I definitely have to give kudos to Congressman Bobby Scott, who advocated for billions of dollars in HBCU funding. And FAMU was the best decision of my life. While I was in high school, they were actually named the number one college by time in the nation. And so choosing an HBCU for me, it wasn't a matter of if, it was which one. And that's because it was a legacy in my family. My parents, all my siblings attended HBCUs. And for those of us who were raised during the days of a different world, many of us yearned for that inclusive environment where we could not only learn what we needed to before entering the real world, but also learn about ourselves, our history. There's nowhere we could get a dedicated course on African-American history, except for at an HBCU. And many of us, it was a required course freshman year. So taking that, learning the history of people who look like you, being on a campus where the majority of students look like you and everyone is excellent, it gives you a different sense of not just belonging, but pride. And now that I'm an alum of FAMU, there's we call it FAMUly. There's a network of professionals in every single industry that I know who look like me, who I can connect my students with, or my kids, my students, my kids with. And it's something empowering about striving to become something that you can see. And because HBCUs have historically been underfunded, I believe that eliminating HBCU debt is a way in which that can essentially bridge that gap that has existed and persisted for decades of the lack of resources for Black students attending HBCUs and the HBCUs themselves.
Yeah, I'd maintain it. It's a great way to help boost equity. If that specifically was the goal, you can help reduce a lot of economic stress going forward in a place where it's needed.
Right.
But the key is you need legislators who want to do that, such as yourself, perhaps. On to the next. So, working in the FBI and the CIA must have been interesting, to say the least. They both have questionable histories. What was your purpose within them, and is it there much more work to be done with what your goal was?
It's funny. I was actually organizing files today and came across my original offer letter from the FBI. And I began actually as a graphic designer. In the government, they call it a visual information specialist. And being a creative in probably one of the least creative spaces definitely had its challenges. But as I was able to infuse my creative juices, design started to take more of a role, especially working for former director Mueller. I worked in the director's research group during his time and started making like these cool graphic covers for his briefing books that typically just had a white sheet of paper and a seal and the title. So whenever he would travel, I would pull images of the cities he was going to and made like these color coded book covers with spines. And once people saw his books, and everyone wanted their books to look like that. So it was cool to influence the branding within the Bureau. And as I continued serving, I was promoted to a management and program analyst, which is basically a jack of all trades program kind of analyst, if you will. And that's when I really started to lean into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Some of the talking points that I recall being used during the time my mother was trying to get in the organization, 20, 30 years later, they were still using. And so I decided that I could show them better than I could tell them. And so one of the first things I did was put on a recruitment fair with a team at FAMU. And not only did we go to the campus, we went a few days in advance and went directly into the classrooms. And I got a list of like all of the hard to fill positions. And we specifically targeted, the computer information systems, the business, the engineering. And then the last day that we were on campus, we held interviews on the spot and made conditional job offers. And that was an amazing way I felt demonstrated that qualified Black talent exists. Not only does it exist, it's excellent.
Excellent. Well, how about your vision and your story on both the Moretta Creations and Phoenix Foundation organizations?
Thank you. So Moretta Creations was literally born out of my desire to maintain my creative juices, if you will, when I started at the Bureau. And I'm the kind of person that doesn't like to be put into a box, which is why instead of designs or communications, I just said creations. So whatever I wanted to create, I wanted to basically have a banner for that. So Moretta Creations has now expanded into comms consulting. And I've done work for Vox Media. I'm what you call an inclusivity reader, which is basically someone who can review campaigns, content, journalistic pieces, and just kind of ensure that the language is inclusive and not culturally offensive to any group. That has also been part of the work that I've done with the Phoenix Foundation, which is specifically focused on ending generational cycles of domestic violence. As you read in my bio, I am a survivor of domestic violence, and realizing because of the advocacy work that I had done with TJ, because of just knowing a lot about the process, I had the ability to advocate for others in a way that the way I saw it is when I discovered the divorce laws required victims to remain legally married to their spouse for a year before being granted a full divorce, I realized I could lobby to have that law changed faster than I could get a divorce. And I feel like that is really the responsibility of those of us who have benefited from an education, from access, from awareness, is to remove barriers and hold doors open for people coming behind us. So that's the work of the foundation, to provide resources and opportunities, wraparound services, because becoming a survivor is hard enough, but transforming from a survivor to a thriving individual is a process, and it takes a village.
Speaking of taking a village, the General Assembly itself, how could that, the governorship and just all aspects of Virginia government, help women who are in that situation? If more than just that law, what other things should be needed?
Absolutely. There needs to be legislation to strengthen the gun laws around um, offenders of domestic violence, and recognition that there are more forms of abuse than just assault. Domestic abuse is a process. It's not a single act. And toxic individuals don't always exhibit physical violence. However, that can cause psychological harm to not just the partner, but also to their children. And so when we look at the increase in, let's say, opioid addictions, or any kind of substance abuse, a lot of this stems from toxic environments in the home. And even now, my divorce is final, but there's still financial abuse. There's legal abuse. And unless and until legislators are educated on the different forms of abuse and how to protect citizens. I mean, right now, 30% of Virginia's homicides are due to domestic abuse and domestic violence. If law enforcement isn't receiving the training that they need to identify those situations, we're going to continue losing lives unnecessarily. So studies even being conducted and recognizing that it's not just women who suffer. And so a lot of lawyers feel as though making it easier to get a divorce will impact their billables. But if the goal is to protect people, that should be beyond secondary. You're muted.
Thanks for pointing that out.
No
I'm
worries.
surrounded by 3 kittens at the moment, so I'm trying not to get them on screen here. And they're trying to bite on the microphone here. But that, to touch on what you just said, this is what we imagine the government to be, is the mechanism which will protect the individual in needs where other people are the ones doing the harm.
Right.
So you're right. We need to improve that government in order to do that. Now, also, I want to touch on the fact that you are a mother of 3, count them 3, who I believe are in a mix of high school and middle school.
No, all high school.
All high school. So
All high school.
good luck.
Thank you.
I want to touch on a few things regarding just that. Let's start off with an important topic, which is going to be for me going forward as well, is Black maternal health, where the issues are in that you have the power, assuming that you get elected, to start to affect change in a positive way via the government. So what do you see are issues with that, and how would you like to change issues with Black maternal health care?
I definitely believe that recruiting and preparing more people of color to enter the medical profession is one part of it. I also believe that education is the root of all of this, which is why I actually began my advocacy work advocating for African American history and inclusive history to be taught in our public schools. One of the things that I realized working in the DE&I space is that we're working on the back end to remediate all of these things, these unconscious bias and these just stereotypical viewpoints, but we are feeding it to our children on the front end. And so the only way we can eliminate a lot of unconscious bias is to stop teaching bias in the first place, which is why there's been a lot of pushback because many people profit, unfortunately, off of the conflict. And even though I chose doctors of color to deliver all three of my children, when I was admitted to the hospital after being assaulted, I kind of got into a fight with the doctor who insisted that I didn't feel the pain of his needle in my forehead. And being in distress already because I'm bleeding and trying to hang on to my life, having to use energy to debate while I'm on the operating table that I can feel this. And he played this game with me where he's like, well, do you feel that? And I'm like, no, because you're not touching me right now. Like, what part of that hurts do you not understand? And no human should have to experience that, especially while they're trying to give life.
And I'm glad that there are more and more politicians such as yourself who are conscious of that, who want to work that into their goal of being a public servant. So I definitely want to bring it up now because you very likely could start addressing that issue and other issues with motherhood. For instance, with a bunch of teenagers at the moment, where is the current pain economically and socially with that? And where should the General Assembly help a mom like yourself?
Well, right now I'm a co-parent. I'm just trying to hold my kids together and make sure that they have a strong sense of self before they leave my home and my protection. But I would definitely say resources, opportunities and resources equitably distributed throughout school districts. I am running to represent the newly drawn 19th, which is along the Route 1 corridor in both South County, Fairfax, and Woodbridge. A lot of the schools are underfunded. They don't have updated infrastructure, and it makes it hard for students to feel valued when you don't invest in resources to help educate and prepare them. My children have obviously been exposed to other elected officials and opportunities beyond those that they see in our community. But that should be the norm for all students, not just for those with privilege. And so I think it's time that we innovate some of the programs that we offer, the specialty programs that we offer in schools, such as day trading. Why don't we teach advanced analytics, in high school, or advanced civics, where we're teaching students how to advocate and engage with elected officials, the components of a campaign, so that when they graduate, they have a whole new world of career opportunities that they could pursue that are relevant to today.
I really like the idea of that. And it's a good message. Speaking of messaging, I want to move on to the message section of tonight's interview. So you, as you just touched, are a write-in candidate for House District 19. So you're approaching the voters. Do you come off, say, you know what, I'm an honest Democrat? Or perhaps you're not portraying yourself as a Democrat, you want to go with progressive. In your heart, how do you appeal to an individual who is a voter, what their pain is, and the pain of a broader Virginia?
I believe a lot of voters, the majority of voters, are honestly exhausted from all of the political conflict. And they see through, I'll call it the game of public charades that parties play with one another. Um, when I engage with voters, I'm very transparent. And so the last time I was actually in a group setting and someone mentioned that I was a candidate, I, conceded that I began this race as a Democrat and now I'm running as an independent. And then, of course, questions come. And I'm very transparent with that as well and direct them to my website if they really want to get into the weeds of what happened in my primary. But my thing is I'm running to represent people. And the parties, although I think it's great to have a set of values and a platform, if you don't operate by those set of values and that platform, it's hard for voters to trust you. So a lot of people have actually expressed appreciation for the fight that I've taken up, for the stance that I've taken up, and are very, very, very supportive. The best, I guess, the most encouraging compliment I've received from a voter is that I seem real. And they were a little concerned if that was offensive or not. And I said, actually, no, that's probably the nicest compliment that that one can give, because unless and until we are real with our voters, trust in government is going to be something that's very hard to repair.
And trust seems so far gone these days. So meeting a politician aspiring down the line, even ones who have already been, if they feel like they're still human, they're not like they got politician brain where they're just feeding off of what they're being told.
Right.
That really ramps up the enthusiasm factor of the public in wanting to go out and think politically and vote for people. So I want more people, even if they are independent, if they're Democrat, if they're a Green Party person, if they're a conservative or a libertarian, as long as they meet someone one-on-one and they have a human conversation,
Right.
it brings it back to where it should have been the entire time.
Right.
But you should a lot for politics. I bet when you began this process, you thought that there was going to be a lot of shoulds that may or may not have happened. So we're going to switch now to your problem section. Now, before I go to my questions, actually, I do want to touch on a comment that I have here on the video from Andrea Dixon / SchezzWho, wife here. What grassroots organization are you interacting with to inform parents and combat misinformation and disinformation about your experiences?
I'm actually going to be engaging with Red, Wine, and Blue on Monday. They're doing a tour to kind of combat Governor Youngkin's Parents First, or whatever the campaign that he's running to push for, I guess, more charter schools and school choice. School boards and schools, public schools, period, are severely under attack. And the video that from my very first school board appearance, having gone viral earlier this year, definitely built momentum among those parents who see what's happening, aren't sure how to engage. And I'm very heartened by seeing more parents start to step up, show up at school board meetings to push back, and also now, launching campaigns of their own, recognizing that, sometimes you have to be the change you want to see. So I'm happy to engage with public education, for public ed, and a lot of the Northern Virginia area groups that are also advocating to protect public schools.
Any of those organizations might help with ones that you are already with, like we touched on earlier, or perhaps ones you might want to create down the line?
I definitely don't believe in reinventing wheels. And, there's no monopoly on good ideas. And so my thing is, to be effective, you have to build a coalition. And even though TJAG specifically took the lane, TJ Alumni Action Group took the lane for advocating for access to advanced STEM education, every organization has their niche, but when you stitch them together to push for a certain cause, like what was formerly NACASEC, what is their name? I can't think of it right now, but it used to be called NACASEC. HAMK. They advocate mostly for Asian American, inclusion and education and access. And so we've built partnerships to push for this inclusive curriculum, but we can still maintain our own identities while working together without reinventing groups.
Without reinventing the wheel. You said too many wheels on the roadway sometimes. Now back to the big problem that you're currently experiencing with, I guess, the entire process of your campaign. So break down that process on why you started running. Did you already have ambition to be political, and did a party reach out to you?
Yeah, so I definitely, let me take that back. I started to get, I'll say, itch or start to feel like I was being called to run for public office after I started working with Congresswoman Jackie Spear on legislation for specifically focusing on the FBI. And she was actually the first person that told me about Emily's List, and I think she could hear my questions. She's like, "I'm going to help you." She's like, "Just go to Emily's List." And she kind of became my second political mentor. Elijah Cummings, I would consider the first. And so I recognized that a lot of the changes that I wanted to see made were going to have to be done within the political space. But I was thinking if I ever ran for something, it would probably be school board because of my passion for education equity. But when this seat became open, I did get a call from a member of the Prince William County Democrats asking me to consider running. And I laughed in their face because not only was I never considering running for state house or state anything, it would require me to resign, like quit my job. And that just seemed ludicrous. Like, who would do that? And
Especially for less money.
Especially for way less money and, a chance at less money. And, I was still in the recovery process from, being a survivor of domestic violence. And I just had so many things going on. It just didn't make sense. And one of the things that they said that really stuck with me was, "You're already doing the work. We just need you in a seat." Mm-hmm. And so I prayed on that. And as I prayed over that decision, I realized that everything in my life that I felt was up in the air actually perfectly aligned to this role. Because I did write legislation to remove the 1-year waiting period. I did have this experience of working with members of Congress on legislation. I did have this experience of being an advocate, and this position allowed me to use all of those lived experiences to help people. And so I felt like, just like a minister's call to preach, I felt like God called me to run, but not just to run a certain way. Mm-hmm. And that's the commitment I made, not just to him, but to myself, that I wouldn't take money from certain groups, that I would always prioritize his people um, over the interests of those who might want to have a hand in the campaign or influence the campaign or basically make me their blackface, and say things that I didn't agree with. So it became a a faith walk for
Mhm.
me, um, and I have no regrets.
Curious because you did touch on money there, and money is always going to be important in politics, and it's a very corruptive thing too. When you look at it, what did they being party apparatus, say the situation would unfold like for you? What the process would be like? Did they say you'd get a lot of money and a lot of organizational support? Is that what you were sold on?
Uh, Pretty much, because even though I prayed, faith without works is dead. And so before taking this leap of faith and selling my home and doing all these things, I wanted to make sure that, me who had no idea what running for office really looked like. I didn't know the paperwork process. I didn't know the order of filing, of getting an EIN and setting up a committee and all of like, I don't know these things. And so before I signed up and said, okay, yep, I'm going to run, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, I called the party chair, and said, "Hey, this is what someone called and asked me to consider. Where do you stand on this?" Because my whole thing was, is if there was someone else that the party really wanted in that seat, why quit my job and do all of these things if I'm not going to be supported in any way, when I would have to basically navigate in the dark. And what they said back to me was, nope, don't know anyone else running. I'm all in. And jokingly, but very serious, I took a picture of my bathroom, which was my favorite room in the house. And I said, okay, you're telling me you're all in. This is what I'm giving up. So don't ever let anyone question my dedication to the cause. And with that, I took the leap.
I'm also curious, do you consider what has since happened to be like a wronging to you? Could you break down? Did it seem like this was on purpose? Did accidents happen? Was there other people that came out of the woodwork that they decided to drop you like a bad habit, effectively?
um, I believe that as I learned, there is a difference between vetting, which I believe the committees feel is their responsibility to vet candidates, and gatekeeping. And what I believe happened is that unfortunately, some leaders are looking for candidates they feel they have influence over, candidates they can control. And although I was green walking into it and needed a lot of hand holding, as far as knowing what to file, when to file, and things of that nature, um, I feel like there was a sense that, oh, we'll be able to control her. And when other people began jumping in the race and support started to shift or disappear, um, I've never been intimidated by standing alone. And if I don't know how to do something, I figure it out. Google is amazing. and and I've always figured, like, problem solving is just a thing that I enjoy doing. And so another thing that I learned was to essentially trust no one. And so I intentionally built a campaign team with party outsiders,
Mhm.
that I could trust and that I knew would be committed to the cause of our campaign and what we were trying to do versus the party or versus being beholden to any specific donor. And I think that definitely put me in the crosshairs of those who are more concerned with maintaining power and control within the state house and legislature than what's really best for people.
And many of those times, you're going to run into the experience of trying to get support among people who are already like-minded and trying to ask them, hey, could you donate to my campaign? Hey, could you publicly support me? And being told no by people who are already like Democrats, that might be particularly unsettling. I've experienced that myself. So hopefully you didn't run into a lot of that, because
I definitely ran into a lot of that.
you did.
And a lot of it was because I had a primary. People are very hesitant to support people because they've seen things happen, right? They've seen situations like mine where, in all the polls and things of that nature, just name recognition within the county or the counties, we were on top, but things happen. And so, and the party has also retaliated against others who support candidates that they don't. So, like I had one particularly say, look, I support you, but I need to make sure that I qualify for the ballot before I publicly say that. And unfortunately, I understood completely. And even though it saddened me, like everyone's kind of got to look out for themselves in this space and what's in the best interest of their political career. So I learned not to take it personal either.
Yeah, learning not to take this personal is probably the biggest talent to have in all this, because it just keeps you grounded and you don't have to overreact.
Right.
So where does this leave you in your personal view of the Democrat Party? Does the party serve the people, or is it more corrupt than it lets on? Is it more of a branding machine than anything? Is it just another party?
I'll say this. There's a party, and then there are party leaders. The same way that there's the FBI and there's FBI leadership. The mission and the goals and the values of the entity is good. I believe in the values of the Democratic Party. Unfortunately, just like in the FBI, you have a set of rules, policies, regulations that all people in leadership don't follow. And it's when the institution works to protect those people instead of abiding by its own rules is when I take issue with that. And I believe in holding people accountable to living and fulfilling the values, stated goals, and rules and policies and the law. I believe in holding people to that.
Here's another one. Would you implement any reform, I guess, to this process? Perhaps reform not just on running as an individual, but reform from the party apparatus?
I mean, all the rules. I think that it's really a matter of we the people, as they say. If like rules only work if you enforce them, right? So let's just say I steal money from you, right? Nothing's going to get your money back unless you press charges, right? Like, and if no one serves as a witness to, oh yeah, I saw her steal his money, there's no justice there, right? And so we have to be good stewards of the things that we see, that we experience. And it's one of those things where if someone breaks the rules, but everyone stays quiet, nothing happens.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
No, no, I would agree with that, especially because the most prominent national politician is flagrantly breaking rules and doesn't seem to have a lot of accountability. We will only
And
have
that's
trust
because
in the
people
system.
in his
Don't hold him
party.
accountable. Yeah.
Right, right. He still has support for doing the wrong things, and I think that's where, individuals have to, 'cause I mean, I've literally had Democrats from across the country reach out and say, "Yeah, they did that in my race too," or, "Yeah, I experienced that too." Um, and it's like, but no one said anything. And I think it's one of those things where people just kinda have this phobia of saying the emperor has no clothes because they know nothing's gonna happen to the emperor. It's gonna be
Mhm.
the person that called the emperor out that gets retaliated against. And it's like, no, but it's still not okay that he's running around naked. Like, that's not a thing. Like, it's no. Um And so, as far as reform to the law, which is what I'm fighting for in the lawsuit, I do believe that there has to be a remedy for parties going against their own plans, because that conflicts with 24.1 dash, what is that, 103A, that requires the Department of Elections to ensure pure elections. And so when the parties take on that role, they are also beholden to Virginia law. And if a party can break its rules with no recourse, um, then it's just going to keep happening as it has been happening for multiple election cycles to come.
Mhm. I would believe you on that matter. And so that, circles back around to the resolution of all this. Do you view third parties, independents, more needed as we enter election 23 and perhaps even with the election cycle? Because that is of 24. That's a national issue where suddenly we have RFK is now running independently.
Mhm.
Dr. Cornel West was the People's Party, then the Green Party. Now he's independent.
Mhm.
Um, I would not be surprised, and it might be very interesting for a civics fan if a lot of the Republicans in the current race to finish second to Donald Trump primary
Right.
themselves decide to split off so they could run independent.
Right.
And then we have, for the first time in our lives, our ballot would have like 8 different presidential candidates, and we're like, now that seems a little bit more maybe the way it should be, or is that not the way it should be? What is you're running now as a write-in? How should we view independents and third parties right now?
I think it's actually going to increase as the parties both become more and more extreme. I think you're going to see more independent candidates because we, the people, are tired of being silenced. And if if a candidate can only be successful if they stick to the script 100%, this is where the party is, this is where I am. You're leaving so many people in the middle who don't necessarily agree with the all or none approach. And so I think as voters are becoming more engaged and working to educate themselves and becoming more politically active, you're going to have people looking specifically at people and disregarding the party labels because, as we've seen, even the Republicans have tried to break into this faction of these Lincoln Republicans versus the Trumplicans and all of the all these sub parties within parties. Um, you can't just take someone's label and assume their values, and I think that's going to increase at every level of government the number of independent candidates.
And on that note, going forward, I think you have mentioned that you have an interest just in the concept of voter education and maybe giving that premise and many other premises within just the idea of getting people more educated as they go to the polls and more enthused because of their education.
Yes.
What longer term goals might you have on that?
Definitely recognizing the lack of education in the school system with regards to civics. Even while knocking doors and engaging with voters in my district, was having one conversation with a gentleman, trying to get him to come out and vote in the primary. And he said, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but what's a primary? And he's like, I'm registered to vote. But what's a primary? And so I explained, I first of all, thanked him for being humble and demonstrating humility enough to ask the question, but recognize that even those of us who are registered to vote and, agree that voting is our civic duty and our civic responsibility, most people didn't know about redistricting. Most people didn't know what their House district number was before or after. Their congressional district, the difference between a congressional district and a Senate district. There's just so much that it can consume you. And if you aren't aware, it can also paralyze you and cause you to just disengage and say, you know what, I'm just going to vote in the fall. I'm going to take that sample ballot and boom, check, done. Not realizing who's on that sample ballot, what their roles and responsibilities are, and how to hold those elected officials accountable for doing what they said they were going to do. So there's just so much to unpack there that, I basically took off and made learning the system my full-time job for 2 years, but most Americans don't have that privilege. So being a good steward of the knowledge that I now have, I feel like it's also a responsibility and a duty to pass it along to others.
And I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you're using this forum, of course, to help spur that on. I would like to also have the idea of having you set among other independent and third-party individuals who are running this cycle, and we can chat it up about the idea of maybe we can grow that idea of voter education beyond just the first two parties in Virginia, even before Election Day in 2023. So that seems pretty cool to me. But as we close out tonight, I want to give you the last word, your last pitch here to viewers who just might also happen to be in the newly drawn HD19. Why should they vote for Makya?
As I've said with this whole race campaign and lawsuit, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than this one campaign cycle, and it's bigger than this one race. It is important that we, the people, reclaim our political power and find our voice and ensure that those elected to represent us do so with our best interests at heart, and making sure that common sense, that data, that facts are factored into that, along with lived experiences. And so I encourage everyone, even if you're registered to vote, check your registration. Make sure you haven't been accidentally purged by the Youngkin administration, and that you know where to vote in your district.
Good one there.
Had to get that one in. Also, know the races that are on the ballot. You can go to vote411.org. Type in your address and it'll show you exactly who's on the ballot, and research those individuals. Like I said, Google is a powerful tool, but make sure that you know who's running, why they're running, what they've done before running, and ensure that they will show up and be accountable to you as your representative. And I look forward to earning your vote.
Excellent. And just shout out your Twitter handles, anything on social media. How did they reach you before Election Day?
Well, God blessed me with a very unique name. So my handle is Makya, Makya Little, on all platforms.
Excellent.
And along with my website, MakyaLittle.com.
Yep, don't forget that. That'll be an important resource going forward as we expand on voter education. Yes. So all that, again, thank you so much for coming on SchezzWho tonight, Miss Makya Little. I wish you nothing but the best in terms of results, because we need someone like yourself on the General Assembly starting next January. So it'll be just quite fun. Again, thank you for coming on tonight, and just have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Again, I have great thanks for Miss Makya Little for joining me tonight. I wish her great luck. I thank you all for watching tonight. I want you to keep watching and share this around. Look forward to many great SchezzWho episodes down the line. Just subscribe to the channel, watch the channel, catch it anytime you can over here on SchezzWho. And I just want to make sure that you have a great night yourselves on SchezzWho. Catch you next time.